Welcome to all of you who are participating in this presentation today. What I'd like to do is ask the panelists to go ahead and give a brief little introduction. As for myself, I've been practicing law for about 39 years now. They added me to the group here to increase the average age. My practice for the last 30 years has included pursuing and defending these type of claims. So with that, why don't we go ahead and Alan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Hi, I'm Alan, or AJ Clark. I'm the manager of local solutions at Badger Infrastructure Solutions, formerly known as Badger Daylighting. And my job is pretty much just to help people locate and map utilities across the U.S.
Fred?
Yeah, I'm Fred Lesage. I'm a construction risk engineer with AXA XL Insurance. My job primarily is to advise our construction clients on best practices in the field, including buried utility damage prevention. Sometimes we assist in response to claims events as well.
Brian?
Good morning. I'm Brian Tooley. I'm with Mitchell Engineering and JSI, and I am a project manager. We are putting a lot of fiber optic cable in the ground from an engineering and construction perspective. Have a good bit of experience in outside plant damage prevention and recovery, and have served at the One Call Center as well.
And last but certainly not least, Tony?
Morning. My name's Tony Jorgensen. I'm an attorney. I worked with Jim at Hall Estel on utility damage claims throughout the country for about 23 years, and just recently, a couple months ago, took a leap of faith and started my own firm where I still do utility damage recovery claims primarily, and have worked with Brian for a long time on these types of claims. Also have done some defense of utility damage claims, so hopefully can add some perspective.
And what I'd like to say is we certainly are not the be-all, end-all on all of this type of investigation. So we invite all of you, in addition to asking questions, to share your own experience with us. What we thought we would do is try and divide this into some steps you can take pre-damage that can well become a part of your investigation if and when there is a damage. And I should probably say when there's a damage, because if is not really a part of the equation in this world, unfortunately. And the second part of it is once there is a damage, what step do you take? So the first question I would throw out to everybody is what are some of the things that you can do pre-damage that will later become a part of your investigation? For example, training documentation, a safety plan, photographs of the site before any damage ever occurs. Who'd like to go ahead and start on that?
Well, Jim, I can.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll go ahead and just say, from an owner-operator perspective, certainly, or if you're using a locate service, photographs after locates have been performed, typically taking those photographs as you arrive on site, how the site looked when you arrived, then performing your locate and taking another photograph after that to document that locates have been performed. Permanent markers or landmarks within the photograph and your locate marks is beneficial. And then from a contractor perspective, prior to any excavation, it is a good best practice to take photographs of that site and of all the locate marks that have been performed already.
Has anybody ever seen a situation where marks magically appear or disappear after the damage occurs?
Yes, that will happen. You know, the one thing I'd add to what Brian said is the retrievability of those photographs after the fact, and the ability to tie those back to a specific excavation or a specific area where a damage event occurs is really important too. You know, we've had these situations with contractors who will go out and their foreman or superintendent on the job site takes photographs, but then when the damage event occurs, well, that guy left the company and he's gone to work for somebody else. How do we get those photographs? How do we get access to those? How are they retrievable? Those are really important things to think about ahead of the event too. Where you store them, where you put them in such a way that you can tie them back to the work is critical in this effort.
Yeah, Fred, this is AJ. I would add that I agree with everything you said. With the photographs, sometimes you just have a pile of photographs and you don't know really where they're from. A couple of things that we do is we collect some GPS data to go with the photographs, and also in photographs there's several different software applications that you can get for an iPhone or any phone that give you a bearing. So when you have bearing and you have location, those photos become infinitely more valuable.
Has anybody ever heard of the use of a photo log? The reason I bring that up is because a case may not go to trial until 5 years after the damage occurred. And what's your chances of remembering what you actually saw in those photographs or what you're showing in those photographs 5 years later?
Well, Jim, you're stealing my thunder, but that's certainly something that I have promoted and recommend always, is to definitely document a brief description of what that photo is intended to show. As you said, oftentimes claims are sometime after an event. So absolutely, that brief description will enable you to recall what you were thinking, what you were seeing at the time of the photo.
Yeah, and more than that, it's we get a lot of these claims that come in where utility will discover that there is a damage to one of their facilities, and they go back to the dig ticket history and say, well, who was digging here? And then they'll shotgun the claim out to anybody who had a dig ticket in that area. Your ability to show whether or not you were digging anywhere close to where the damage occurred is important too. You know, we sometimes you call in a dig ticket and the footprint for that dig ticket is much larger than the area that you actually excavated. And, you know, we've seen claims come in from utilities where the damage is 500 feet away from where the excavation took place. So again, that's another piece of that retrievability. So when that claim comes in 5 years after the fact, can I show where my crew was digging on that project on that day related to that dig ticket? All of that will put you in a position to be able to defend yourself from the claim.
Well, photographs are obviously important, as we've all said there. One picture is worth 1,000 words. That's why lawyers don't like to have pictures, because they'd rather use 1,000 words. But in addition to the importance of the photographs, are there any other documents that you're going to have before a damage occurs that you want to make sure you preserve? One that comes immediately to mind are the locate ticket that you get from the one call center. What's the importance of that? How can that be used?
Well, for one thing, it established.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Okay, sorry. I say the tie that if you're a locator or acting on behalf of an owner operator, you're gonna have a one call ticket. Tie that information, the photographs, and potentially even your locate contract back to that ticket somehow in your database. And if you're an excavator, you're also going to have a ticket, but you're also going to have, a contract and an invoice. So when you look at like how you organize your information, really at the end of the day, you're going to have some sort of statement of work, some sort of, and you're going to have some sort of invoice. And so tying those things together can be really helpful, because when you have to go back in time, it makes things a lot easier.
How about having a plan in place to respond to a damage? One thing I always come back to is having one person in charge who coordinates the efforts. As an attorney, if I'm looking at a claim, I'd like nothing better than to have 11 people talk to me, because you wonder if 10 of them were at the same site together. Do you guys have any recommendations with respect to how you prepare to manage a damage if and when occurs?
Well, certainly training should be provided. Typically, a first responder on site is going to be that person who collects the majority of the data, perhaps. Oftentimes you may not have an investigator who can make it on site. So training to have those first responders capable of capturing all the information is critical. Jim, if I could just step back one time with regard to the one call ticket that we're documenting and having in advance, it is certainly important for our excavators to review that ticket, confirm all of the entities that have been notified have responded out on site. So if you are keeping your documentation, that is another best practice, is to review the entire site for all of the markings that have been made, and actually check off and ensure that each person or each entity that has been notified has responded to that locate ticket. So again, when we're talking about training prior to the event, that is something that the project foreman should absolutely be doing before they ever start to dig out there.
Yeah, the other thing ahead of the accident that I think we ought to think about too is photographs of successfully executed work. So if you've potholed a crossing, for example, and you can show that you safely crossed another line at your pothole with photographic evidence, that's valuable. If you have opened an excavation, that you can show that you've properly supported the existing infrastructure that you've found during your excavation. All of those things that establish that you did your job the right way are valuable when it comes to defending claims. And accident or no, that's valuable.
Building on what Fred just said, when you take a picture of a pothole, you take a picture of something, one of the things that we come across with photographs all the time is perspective. That fish I caught was that big. Brian, you've got something there, I think, that is very helpful, both in taking the photographs that Fred just described, and also some of the photographs we'll talk about later on once a damage does occur.
Well, certainly, Jim, the old adage is, hey, that's a great picture of a hole. Again, this goes back to training. Any owner, operator, and contractor, they should be training their people out in the field as to what photos to take, how to take good photos, and really tell a story with those photos. So we want to take a picture of an entire site. We want to include permanent landmarks in those photos. We want to be sure that we do get locate marks in the photos. And Jim, I think you may be referring to the field ruler that I showed you guys a few minutes ago, so a visual. But this type of tool shown in photographs is often important, but again, we don't want to just take a picture of one hole that shows a big black bottomless pit. We really need to be telling that story with our photos out there.
Hey, I would just add, hey,
Go ahead.
I would just add, with the photos and this goes equally for pre-excavation as in the event we have a damage and you're doing an investigation after a damage. Google Earth is an invaluable tool for. I mean, if Jim mentioned earlier a photo log. One of the best ways to visually represent what your individual photos are showing is you go on Google Earth and plot where you took photo one from, your perspective, where it is in relation to the entire project or the entire locate, and just screenshot or save that information along with your however you package your pre-excavation I guess site review. Just include that Google Earth photo with a diagram showing the area, the locate, and where your locate pictures were taken. Lots of times it'll be easy to dovetail that information with the information Alan was talking about earlier with your GPS coordinates. But Google Earth is a really valuable tool, both pre-damage and post-damage.
Before we leave the topic of photographs, we've got a question here from our participants that I think is probably directed to Alan here. And that question is, why can't the pictures a locating company takes be given to the excavator before the excavation starts?
Yeah, that's a great question. They certainly can be, and they should be. And I'd add even more to that. We do a lot of private locating, so our stuff's a little bit different. But any communication that's had between the excavator and the locator will prevent further damages, right? And photographs are a wonderful way to communicate. But even just picking up the phone, if it's possible, and I know the line of communication isn't always there, but yeah, it certainly can. I see in the notes that there's ticket management systems that you can use, that you can attach the photos to. In my opinion, they should absolutely be shared. Getting them there can be a challenge, depending on logistics, but yes, that's a definite thing that would help. And maps and drawings, by the way. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna. What about so many operators are using contract locators. I could see a situation where an excavator is out in the field, has questions or concerns about a certain company's markings. How does that excavator know, in the case of a contract locator, who is locating for a particular utility? Sometimes that might be a hurdle in the communication. Maybe it's as simple as calling you've got your locate ticket and it's got X number of members that were notified, and it just seems like an unnecessary burden to put on an excavator to start calling down the list to figure out whose marks these are and who located them. Does anybody have any suggestions about how to, I agree with you, Alan. Communication, particularly before damage, avoids 85–90% of damages. Any suggestions about how to remove that impediment? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, right?
I think. Oh, go ahead, Fred. Please.
No, that's all right. Go ahead, Alan. You got direct information on it.
Oh no, but I was going to say, As far as the burden goes, I don't think a lot of excavators mind necessarily calling the contact information on the one call ticket. I think the frustrating part is when the information on the one call ticket leads to a dispatcher who's in a different place, who's not the actual locator. And that's ultimately up to, the owner operator and or the contract locate company acting on behalf of them to just try to have a little bit better contact. But on the other hand, then this is going to cost more money. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
But maybe is the better. I mean, can that all happen through the one call center, the one call notification? An excavator has questions about a particular set of markings and use the. I mean that's essentially. I mean I don't mean to generalize too much, but the one call centers, that kind of medium of exchange is probably the best the best go between excavators and locate companies or operators with respect to what's going on before damage. So that might be something that might be best done through the one call center. And of course, then if all the communication or the bulk of the communication went through the one call center, we clearly have documentation of it, which was something we were talking about earlier as being super important after the fact.
Yeah, I think it's evolving. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. There wasn't even any positive response, right? And now
Right.
there's at least positive response almost everywhere. And someone at Susan in the chat there wrote, it'd be great to have a two-way positive response. Wonderful idea. And also there are one call centers that do allow the locators to attach tickets. So it's improving, evolving, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
We've got a question here that I want to throw out to Fred because I think this dovetails with some of the things you said earlier, Fred. The question is, we complete 300 sites per week. To keep a database of all these sites would be a nightmare. And then I'll address a corollary of that question to Tony. What's the nightmare for an excavator if you don't keep information and a damage occurs? Other than seeing me and Tony in court. So, Fred, why don't you go ahead?
Well, the one thing I would say is there are a number of software providers out there that have cell phone apps that you can take the photos inside of and tie it back. That way, it doesn't really make it much more difficult for you to take the photos in the field. It organizes it for you and makes retrievability more practical. It's probably not perfect, but at the same time, it's much better than trying to take a set of photographs, create your own file system, and try to establish, like the questioner was saying, about 300 files a week on where you're going to keep this stuff. There are, like I said, there is some technology out there that makes this a more practical exercise.
I just add to that. I mean, 300 a week is a volume at which it makes sense to invest in that type of software. I mean, and honestly, the technology with artificial intelligence and the ability to customize software for custom workflows and processes. If you've got a workflow in place, this is the way we do it every time we call in to locate. We go out there and do a site review. Within 2 hours of our site review, we've sent out notifications or inquiries to each of the potentially unmarked facilities. It's a process, and it can be automated. And at a level of 300 a week, I can't think of a good reason not to make that.
Yeah, you have to
investment.
remember that those 300 a week, that's 300 opportunities a week for a damage claim to come in, even if you do your job perfectly. Because like I mentioned earlier, the utilities are not shy about trying to recover losses from anybody who had a dig ticket anywhere close to where their excavation took place. So every one of those is an opportunity where you're going to have to defend yourself, even if you do everything right and you don't hit anything.
And it's not just the utilities that will come after you. Let's presume that you damage a gas line and you start a fire, or you damage a gas line and you don't realize it, and the gas seeps into a home or a business, and then there's a fire or an explosion in the business. You know, how many millions of dollars can that claim rise to, in addition to the horror of somebody being killed or seriously injured?
The cost of a single claim that doesn't go your way, or the cost and the increase in your insurance premiums. I mean, you know, contractors need to have coverage to be out there, you know, on railroad and DOT rights of way, and claims increase the cost of that coverage, and it also decreases your ability to procure that type of coverage in the future. Those costs, I haven't sat here and run the numbers, but those costs, it just seems to me, would clearly offset whatever cost you needed to invest at the front end to develop, to buy software if you need to develop software if you need to track these claims and make sure that all your T's are crossed and I's dotted before the backhoe shovel goes in the ground.
Well, I think we've had a pretty thorough discussion of things we want to do in advance that will come into play later on if there is a damage. So let's move on to the next step of the discussion today. A damage has occurred, and there's been a utility line damaged. What do we want to do immediately when that occurs? And let's talk first about the before the damage even begins, the safety of the people on the site. If you hit a gas line, what would you do? If you hit an electric line, what would you do?
Well, one of the things that I will say frequently doesn't happen, and we've seen events get much worse because of it, is if you hit a gas line, you're required by law to call 911 immediately. And a lot of people don't do that. They call 811 and tell them, hey, we think we hit a gas line. Maybe they'll call the utility. You need to call 911 and get appropriate emergency responders on the scene as soon as possible. There may be a need to evacuate spaces, and those authorities need to be there in order to do that. So that's the one thing I would say, that if you're going to train people on, do that one first, because you have the potential for it to be a much worse event, much worse than just property damage if you don't do that.
I'm going to add a personal anecdote to that. The first claim I ever did was a gentleman who rammed a front end loader into the side of a 36-inch high pressure gas line. He lived for 10 days with third-degree burns over 90% of his body. So if you hit something like that, shut your machine off immediately. Because what happened with him is the engine was behind the place he was sitting on the machine, and it sucked the gas over him and into the machine when the fire started. So, you know, shut it down. If you're in an electrical, you hit an electric line, don't get off the machine, because you can have a field around your machine where you can get electrocuted if you step off the machine, which may well be grounded while you're sitting there. So make sure people are prepared in situations like that, so you don't wind up with a claim from your own employees or contractors. We're going to take a step back here for a minute. Fred, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but somebody's asked, Do you have a name for the app you were discussing?
I'll tell you, I would say Google is your friend, and I'd like to shy away from endorsing any one over any other. There are a number of them out there, and they have different features. So let me just say that that's probably the best way for you to find it. I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that directly.
Okay. Now you sound like a lawyer.
I do. Yeah. I admit it. I've hung around enough lawyers in my life, and it's starting to rub off on me.
Well, Jim, if we go back to, you know, what do we want to do after it is safe to investigate the damage? Of course, we want to make the site safe before we do anything else. But that first responder to the scene of a, say, fiber cut or other utility damage, I think, again, training in advance is well worth and really required to effectively defend yourself. Again, either from an owner-operator perspective in a damage recovery scenario, or the excavator in proving that, as Fred did earlier, they did all, as Fred said earlier, that they did all the right things. So again, training your field personnel is critical. The other thing is to, as Tony said earlier, have a process in place where you do the same thing each and every time you go out. And I think the one thing that's important with that is having a form to complete. You know, the dirt field form is out there available, and it can be modified to suit any particular needs, but it, you know, have a form out there that your investigator or first person on site, that's what they're completing. It should have all of the information that you need to capture in order to document, investigate, and then process a claim.
Building on what Brian said, with the use of a form in an investigation, can any of you discuss the importance of including facts in those reports as opposed to including opinions in those reports?
I'll just jump in, Jim. Yeah, obviously, you want to include facts, objective data. Nobody really cares about your opinions or your colorful language about what went on out there on the site when, you know, when tempers were high and so on. You know, what might seem appropriate and even humorous at the time certainly is not going to look that way a couple, 2 or 3 years from now, when you're sitting in the hot seat in a deposition answering questions about your you know, snarky remarks in a report. But I'd also add about reports. I think reports and forms, you know, damage investigation forms are excellent. I mean, and to the extent that you can attach your photos, your locate tickets, your Google Earth, I mean, all of the documents, and you know, and some types of documents or items are going to be pertinent in some claims or damages, and not in others. You know, that ability to be flexible is great, but I mean, just as a practical consideration, nearly every locate company out there and nearly every operator out there has some sort of a damage investigation form. My only aside to those forms or those incident reports is give some thought to how the person, and this also goes in with the training, but give some thought to how the person completing that form might read some of the inquiries. For example, I've seen utility owner forms that they have a field in there that says were the marks accurate? Yes or no? Check the box. What was the distance between the mark and the damage? I think probably most people on this call understand what they mean is what's the horizontal distance between where the damage is and where the closest mark is. But the way that form is written, and that, I mean, I'm not making this up. This is a real form that I've had to deal with lots of times, because the person going out there to investigate the damage looks at that field and says, well, the marks are kind of destroyed around where the damage occurred. So the closest mark was the next, was 20 feet away. And it's horizontal. Well, that's clearly not what the form is intended to, the information that the form is intended to gather. And it causes problems down the road where, again, we're in a deposition, and the person that completed the form is sitting in the hot seat, and the attorney says, well, you say right here that the marks were accurate, and here in Florida we've got a 24-inch tolerance zone, but you say that the closest mark was 48 inches away. It's not worth the time and effort to have to backpedal and explain that later. Adding the word horizontal, what was the horizontal distance between the damage and the closest mark in that form itself would have avoided that issue altogether. So, I mean, that's my only aside is if you're going to use forms and incident reports, make sure that they're designed to gather the information you're trying to get.
Yeah, Anthony, how you can do that is you just have your target line, and then like pictures of pin flags on a diagram, and then just leave a blank, and the person fills in that blank. So it's like a diagram as opposed to having it in words.
Yeah,
absolutely right. People get very confused.
Regardless of
so maybe that's
regardless of what form you use and or how you document it, people don't think about this, but you hand this form to a guy after he's hit something, or he pulls it out of his file. It might be the first time he's ever looked at it. You really need to train him at some point on how to properly complete that form, especially in this environment where I think it was Jim said earlier, it's not a matter of if, it's probably a matter of when that you're going to have an event at some point that you're going to need to document. And so taking the time to explain to a foreman or superintendent or whoever investigates the incident, how you want that documented and what the various fields in the form are intended to capture could be very useful to you when you're trying to formulate a defense later.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point, Fred. I agree.
Building on what Alan said, let's talk about the importance of a diagram. You can use all the words you want, and as Tony said, they can be confusing. Do you mean the marks were within the tolerance zone, but they were 10 feet away because the marks immediately next to the damage had been destroyed? Do you mean that the closest mark was 10 feet away and thus 8 feet outside the tolerance zone? How does a diagram help to eliminate some of the problems, or at least ameliorate some of the problems that Tony was describing when you just try and describe it verbally? How important is making a diagram of what's out there?
Well, I always say a picture's worth 1,000 words, whether it's a photograph or a diagram or some combination thereof. It's much more difficult to misconstrue what somebody draws or takes a picture of than it is to parse their words. And the problem you get into with just words too is there's vernacular that people use in the field and slang that's used within certain industry groups in certain parts of the country that may not align with what everybody else uses too. So trying to clarify what you mean is you can do that much easier in a sketch. A markup of a Google Earth drawing, like Tony suggested earlier too, is a great idea too.
How about taking the photograph?
Yeah, I would say just.
Annotating. I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Oh, it's me. I'm sorry, it was AJ. But I would say just use the tolerance zone diagram provided from the local one call system, and then where it's got the 24 in there, just leave that part blank. You're all set. The work's kind of been done for you.
Have you all come across situations where somebody takes a photograph and then they annotate on that photograph? Does that work as well as a diagram? Is that something that you can do in lieu of a diagram? Just taking that photograph and annotating it.
Yeah, I think as long as you still have access to the unmarked up photograph, sometimes the markings on the photograph will obscure details that you might want to show. So having a clean photograph and a version that's marked up, I think that's certainly a reasonable way to approach it.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we use frequently, I don't know what the official word is. I call them storyboards, where, you know, particularly in a case where there's a question about was the facility marked prior to the damage, or where were the marks post-locate as opposed to prior to the damage, because, you know, construction activities frequently wipe out marks. You know, again, I mean, I'm probably not the technology expert in this room, but, you know, I can put two photographs right next to each other and make the annotations between the two of them. I mean, here's the post-locate photograph, shows the marks before any excavation occurred, and here's the damage photograph with Brian's ruler and, you know, and the damaged pedestal in the photo, and just draw the lines. I mean, here's where the damage occurred. Here's where the mark was prior to the damage. You know, that type of tool is very useful afterwards. And as far as
photographs, what do you want to photograph when you're out there at the site, as opposed to just taking a picture of everything that's out there? And what are the things that are most important in your experience to photograph?
Well, you definitely want a close-up of a damaged facility and nothing else. I'm just kidding. I can't tell you, you know, you'd be looking at a file after a damage, and half the photos in there are of, you know, a spaghetti-looking, colorful tree root with no perspective, I mean, it could be anywhere. It could be in Washington State or in the Everglades. Obviously, I guess my 2-second training on what photos to take and how to take them, start, you know, some distance away and then close in. And then Ron Peterson, who does, you know, a lot of work, and I use him as an expert in a lot of these cases. He's got a really good training session about photographs and what photographs to take, and the idea he uses is kind of based on a clock. You kind of go around, you take a photo at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. That gives you the entire perspective all the way around whatever it is you're trying to show, either the damaged location. If you back up, you know, you can clearly get the landmarks, the street signs, the wings from the bridge, whatever it happens to be. Anyway, I think,
one of the things that we've struggled with sometimes in defending claims is we have a good photo of the area as it was marked before the excavation began, and then the damaged photos don't show the same angle of the photo from the pre-excavation dig. So trying to explain where the damage is in relation to where the marks were can be complicated when you do that. So I would say if you could come up with a photograph that's very similar to the angle that was taken prior to excavation starting, that's something you would want to do.
The answer, I mean, you know, if a locate contractor, for example, is taking post-locate photos, and then a representative from the utility owner is taking the damage photos, which frequently occurs, I think that situation that Fred described is a lot more prevalent, where you have photos of the same area that are hard to match up. I don't have an easy answer to that one, but more photos is better than less. At least gives you a little bit more ability to choose. If you have 2 or 3 damage photos, and it's hard to sometimes get that matchup.
Brian, would you hold up that ruler again?
Yeah.
What is the importance of using something like that ruler Brian is holding up in your photographs? Why do you want to do that?
Well, again, I think it documents, my thing is that we would always put this out, include it in the photo. It does give perspective. It's large. It shows what the dimensions are. And as Tony suggested earlier, and as what is the key to most damages, is documents the distance from locate marks to actual location of damage. Now, sometimes that location of damage may be hard to include in a photo, so you might have to use a range rod or a shovel or something to measure against. But again, I think the field ruler does, it provides the evidence per se of what you're trying to show out there.
And
Good
if you
perspective.
don't have one of those rulers, you can use a tape measure, but when you're doing it, what I would suggest is you take one from far away and then you take close up of the mark on the tape measure, because unlike that rule that Brian has, one of the drawbacks of a tape measure is you can't read it later on. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the documents that you want to collect when there has been a damage to defend yourself. What are you looking for? What things are important to preserve?
Well, a lot of things are going to be maintained by others. The original dig ticket is certainly useful. We don't often think about employee training records probably, but that's something that could be valuable too, to show that you've trained people on the appropriate practices. If you have something like internal procedures, those are useful too, showing that you adhered to your own internal guidance. Those are valuable things.
Yeah, I would add the SOW.
Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I would just add if there was a like a statement of work, what was supposed to happen, because that what actually was performed, because that can be a big difference.
Jim, one thing that you always hammer on and reiterate, preserve the facility that was damaged. If it's a cut cable, preserve the ends of the cable from the site. Perhaps it's a pipeline that's got tooth marks in it, but that damaged facility itself is also important to preserve.
I could probably list about 50 categories or types of documents that come up in one or the other of these types of claims, but I think it's probably consistent with what Alan was alluding to earlier, lots and lots of the damages that I get or litigate happen on DOT rights of way during the course of a construction project. I always get those plans. You know, the plans are useful for, you know, depending, I mean, some of them show depth, some of them show the facilities on the plans. If somebody, you know, is later saying, hey, look, we didn't have any idea that XYZ utility was out there, or these are your plans, it's right here. You know, and you know, it'll show you what the scope of work was, what depth was, where was the cut line, how deep were they intending to go, was it reasonable under that, in that situation, to expect an excavator to pothole, for example. I mean, if we've got facilities shown on a plan that are 30 feet deep, and the excavation just requires some surface grading, you know, remember it, you know, when at the end of the day, if you're in a lawsuit, the standard that you're going to be adjudged by is what would a reasonable person do under these situations, in these circumstances, and sometimes you know, some of that's going to be dependent upon the circumstances. So the situation I described earlier about, you know, depth and plans will go into that reasonableness calculation. You know, other documents, obviously photos, incident reports, locate tickets, construction plans, contracts with between generals and subcontractors. You know, was there an incentive? Was there an incentive to not excavate safely in the subcontract? I mean, you know, these footage contracts, shoot, I mean, you get paid by how much you get into the ground. You know, was there an incentive not to excavate safely? Hopefully, I haven't seen very many of those recently, not quite as many as there were in the early 2000s. But you know, all of those types of document, you know, past incidents, you know, is this a repeat offender? Did the person have reason to know that excavating in this manner would cause damage based upon, you know, past incidents where they, you know, damaged facilities in that same type of scenario? Training manuals. What type of training did the individual crew members receive prior to their employment with the contractor, and then after their employment with the contractor? Owners manuals for the equipment they were using. You know, they're using a Vermeer XYZ, you know, boring rig. That, you know, what was the sawn calibrated properly according to the you just tons and tons of information you can collect. Not necessarily the most practical types of things to collect, you know, when you're doing an investigation immediately after a damage. But those are the types of things that come in at the end of the day.
We've got one from the participants here that goes back to, I think, some of the things Fred talked about being able to find everything again. How long should you preserve all this evidence? You know, how long can it take for a claim to come in? How long can it take for a claim to go to trial?
I've seen claims that come in for damage that supposedly happened 5 years ago. You know, if a line fails and the utility goes and excavates it to do a repair, they may find that a damage happened at some time in the past. And so going to history of dig tickets to find out who was excavating there, they'll look for who it might have been. And so that's probably the oldest one I've seen. I mean, you guys that are attorneys probably have a better idea about statutes of limitations on how long something can go, but And it probably varies by state, but just as a round figure, 5 years is what I've seen. I always say if you can keep them forever, that's probably in your best interest, but it's probably not practical.
Well, I'll build on what Fred said with an example. Had a case in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, the statute of limitations is 6 years. And the claim or the lawsuit was filed 5 years and 363 days after the damage incident occurred. And by that point in time, 2 of the people that were involved were dead. The person that had done the line locating and marking had died. The person who had engineered the project had a heart attack and had died. So you may want to check in your particular state to see what is the statute of limitations. How long can such a claim come in?
Yeah, I'd just say, I think Fred's exactly right. I mean, if you're looking for a baseline, it'd be the statute of limitations. I mean, where you, in some states where you've got particularly claims against municipalities where there's a Tort Claims Act claim procedure that governs, sometimes those claims have to be submitted in as short as 60 or 90 days. In other states like Wisconsin, Minnesota, and there are some other ones, have statutes of limitations that extend out to 6 years. And statute of limitations is probably a good baseline, but as a practical matter, storage is cheap these days. I agree with Fred. If you can keep them forever, keep them forever. Put them out on the cloud. The days of having to collect and keep everything on floppy disks or little thumb drives are over.
Are they?
Well, I think so.
Okay. Tony's younger than I am.
Hey, Jim, there was a good comment in the chat here to go back to what you're preserving, what documents. That pre-excavation checklist where and this is especially for the contractor, pre-excavation checklist, have all the utilities responded to the site? So that's a very good document to keep for your investigation.
We're coming up on about 10 minutes left here in our meeting, and what I'd like to do is address one more topic, and that's witnesses at the site and interviewing those witnesses. I think the first step we want to talk about is just identifying the important witnesses. How do we go about that?
Well, one of the things is identifying who was on your crew. So if it's your employees, who all was present when it happened. Those are all important things. The equipment operator, certainly, who the supervisor was, if you got laborers, all of those things are important to know. If there are other contractors on the site, a general contractor might have a superintendent. You want that person's name, contact information. In an instance like this, those are the important folks to know. The people who are actually had some direct involvement in the job. The idea of a third-party witness on a damage claim is probably not a useful piece of information, in my opinion.
I would disagree a little bit. I think third-party witnesses, if you can find them, I mean, they won't always be around, but some of those folks, maybe I misunderstood you a little bit, Fred. Some of those folks, other contractors that are out there on site.
No, other contractors, I absolutely agree. The problem is if you have a passerby who supposedly saw something, they don't understand what they're looking at or what they saw, and they just add confusion to the process.
Yeah,
that's not always the case. Like if we investigate an auto accident, sometimes that's not the case. A third-party witness is often helpful, but in this situation, you have somebody who doesn't understand what they're looking at,
But those disinterested, the witnesses that don't have a lot of skin in the game are generally regarded as probably the most reliable.
Yeah.
And so if you can identify those folks, you're ahead of the game.
what are the pros and cons of actually recording or having a witness fill out a written statement?
Well, we mentioned earlier what people write in vernacular and slang, and sometimes that gets misconstrued. It can be read much differently than the intent when it was written, I guess, is my thought on that one.
If it's my witness, I would just soon not have a written statement. If it's somebody else's witness, I love written statements. But I would go back. We talked earlier about completing reports. Some of that might fall in the category of a statement. The key is just keep it objective, facts only. Gather your information, avoid trying to make your case. Just gather the facts, be straightforward. Those types of statements rarely are harmful at the end of the day, in my experience.
We have a follow-up question from the how long should I preserve the evidence? And the question is 5 years from the damage or 5 years from the discovery of the damage? Tony, that's probably a legal question.
Yeah. A lot of the time, like Fred alluded to earlier, I mean, there may be a damage and you don't discover it until 6 months afterwards.
Or
in
longer.
that case, yeah, or longer, exactly. I mean, we have, somebody drives a concrete form stake through a pulp cable, and it takes a while for the water to seep in there and start shorting those copper. I mean, so I guess 5 years from discovery is probably the answer in 99% of the cases.
The longer you can hang on to it, the better off you are.
Right, exactly.
That's my take on it too. You never know when it's going to come back to get you.
Well, Whitney, I think we're coming down to the end here. Do you want to take over?
I will, yeah, thank you, Jim. So it looks like we were at time, but if you would like to stay on for a few minutes, we will have a short coffee and questions session to address any additional questions you may have. Please take a moment now to fill out the brief survey that Levi will post in the chat so we can continue to improve these discussions and address topics important to you. On behalf of everyone at Infrastructure Resources, I would like to thank all of our attendees and those who shared thoughts and solutions today, and also a big thank you to our moderator and panelists for sharing their knowledge and insight on the topic. A recording of the town hall will be posted on excavationsafetyalliance.com, where you will also be able to register for next month's town hall on December 8th, titled PHMSA and NTSB Recommendations for Tolerance Zones. Does one size fit all? Please consider joining us in Tampa, Florida, February 14th through the 16th in 2023 for the Global Excavation Safety Conference, where we will have additional discussions and a wide variety of educational opportunities. Global ESC is also your opportunity to have some fun by taking part in the Click Before You Dig Golf Scramble on Friday and our night of networking on Wednesday with hundreds of your industry peers at Splitsville, Southern, and Social. First-time attendees can take advantage of the 811 special, which is more than 30% off the current price. You can do so by going to globalexcavationsafetyconference.com. We will now continue for those who want to participate in our brief coffee and questions session. So Jim, I'll now turn it over to you.
Well, at this point, it's up to, I think, the people to ask the questions based on anything we said, or more importantly, I guess, based on things that we may not have covered that you want. So we do have one question left over. Is it actually necessary to keep the actual piece of damaged pipe? And if so, for how long?
It's not necessary to keep anything. It's just what puts you in a better position to defend yourself. So whatever evidence you have is something that adds to the total bulk or the weight of the argument you're trying to make.
Just generally, the reason that you would keep the damaged facility in most cases are in those incidents where you would have where there's a dispute as to who caused the damage or how the damage occurred. For example, we've got a damaged, fiber cable. We think it was done with a backhoe. Somebody claims, look, we were out there, we were hand digging. Nobody had a backhoe out there. It couldn't have been damaged with a backhoe. It happens rarely, but I've had a couple of cases where I've had to get an expert involved to examine the physical damaged cable and opine whether or not you could have caused this damage with a hand tool, assuming you're not Paul Bunyan, and and were the marks on the outer sheath or the pipe or whatever consistent with marks from an excavator or a backhoe as opposed to a shovel or a pickaxe or something like that. A lot of times the whole spoliation of evidence is kind of a scary thing, and lawyers were a little bit overcautious sometimes in that regard. If you can keep the damaged facility for inspection later, if it ever becomes an issue, you're better off. In the vast majority of cases, though, photographs of that damaged facility are probably gonna cover it. I mean, and then obviously, if you've got a damage that occurs, you've got 300 feet of fiber optic cable wrapped around a drill stem and a photo of it. Is it really necessary to have the pigtail of fiber cable? Probably not.
Well, Whitney, at this point, I think we're relying on you in part. Do we have any more questions from anybody?
There is a question about how important do you feel it is to show the dig law violated in the investigation? I'm sort of the opinion that'll come out in the wash, so.
I would say it's important for the people to know the dig law. Someone had mentioned that you might want to put that on like your ground checklist or something like that. So that way, when you're gathering information, like Brian's measuring tool there, if you knew that the tolerance zone is 24 inches, that would be great. Or if you knew that the excavator had, for example, dug early, the date, that would be important stuff to know. But yeah, I agree with Fred too, though. It'll come out.
The law is the law. It's not going to change. The fact that you documented in your investigation is, unless you're trying to establish that you know what the law is, like Al said, that's.
Here's a question. It says that they're specifically directing it to Tony, but I think all of you can chime in on this one. The question is, how important do you feel it is to show that the dig law was violated in the investigation? Or correspondingly, from Alan's perspective, perhaps more than mine and Tony's, that it wasn't violated.
I'll give you my 2 cents, and I'll try to keep it short because I know I talk too much. But I can't think of a deposition that I've taken of an excavator or a foreman out there on site that I haven't asked the question. Doesn't matter what state it is. Have you read the one call statute in this state, or that governs the excavation that you were performing at the time? Keep in mind, I'm trying to show that you did not act like a reasonable excavator would have acted under the circumstances. And is it reasonable to expect that an excavator doing excavation out on a DOT right of way know the one call statutes that govern their activity, I think it's absolutely. And if I can show that, man, no idea what the one call statute required other than I had to make a call ahead of time. So I think it's super important that your folks, at least the foreman, the superintendent out there on site, be familiar with the one call statutes that govern. And almost every one call, and that's probably an overstatement, lots of one calls have excavator guides. I mean, these little pamphlets, kind of a summary. I mean, it's not the whole statute, but I mean, put it above your visor in your truck, and just be familiar with it. I think it's super important. The other reason that proving or disproving compliance with one call statutes comes in, a lot of one call statutes have statutory penalties. Or impose statutory liability. So if I can establish that the one call statute required you to do X, Y, and Z, and if you didn't do X, Y, and Z as required by the statute, I mean, it's game over. I don't have to show whether or not your activity was reasonable or not. In some cases, I don't even have to show that your violation of the one call statute caused or contributed to the damage. The mere fact that you violated the one call statute exposes you to strict liability in some states. Not every one call statute is like that. But yeah, every case, I have a copy of the one call statute that was in effect at the time of the damage in my file, and you should probably have one in yours if you're an excavator as well.
It makes Fred's job much easier. All he has to do then is write the check.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
right.
tell me who to make it out to.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it on the additional questions. So thank you all for staying on for a few extra minutes. It was a great chat.
Thanks, Whitney.
Right, thank you.
All for
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.